Hello, everyone. I'm Olivia Mattis, welcoming you today on behalf of the Sousa Mendes Foundation. I'm so happy that you've joined us. We represent a hero, a rescuer of World War II. He was a Portuguese diplomat named Aristides de Sousa Mendes. He acted in France during the early parts of the Holocaust during World War II, as I said. And he was giving visas to Portugal to allow desperate refugees to escape from France through Spain to Portugal to their final destinations the world over. He did it against the orders of his government. He was harshly punished, and we honor his memory. For the last 4 years, we have been doing these Sunday programs where we honor not only Sousa Mendes, but other heroes, non-Jewish and Jewish, of rescue and resistance. We shine a spotlight on stories that should be better known, and today is a glorious story, the story of Avrom Sutzkever and the Paper Brigade. Sutzkever is so important that there have been several films made about him. You saw one of the films by that title, The Paper Brigade. And we are fortunate to have his granddaughter from Israel with us. Her name is HADAS KALDERON, and you will hear from her soon. She's an actress, a well-known actress in Israel, and you met her in the film. Also on our program, joining us from Berlin, is the historian Elizabeth Gallas, who wrote a very important book called A Mortuary of Books, where she tells this and other stories of the rescue of Jewish culture during the Holocaust. Usually we focus on the rescue of lives, but occasionally we look at Jewish culture, and today is one such program. And finally, I'm so thrilled that we have representing YIVO, the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, their CEO, Dr. Jonathan Brent. YIVO is actually co-sponsoring today's program, and we love partnering with wonderful organizations. And YIVO was born out of the story that we're telling today. So this is a real thrill. Before we hear from our speakers, we're going to see a little video clip from 60 Minutes.
You've said that some people resisted by taking up arms or by smuggling food or medical supplies, and this was a form of resistance also.
Yes, because they knew that if they are not going to survive, the Jewish people would have their culture again to remember.
HADAS KALDERON is the granddaughter of Avrom Sutzkever, an avant-garde poet in Vilnius in the 1930s. During the war, he became one of the leaders of the Paper Brigade.
It was a nickname, a Paper Brigade. People in the ghetto laughed at them. Oh, you're smuggling papers, smuggle food, we need food.
What was the response to that?
You have to understand that poetry, literature, and culture was part of their soul.
Calderon grew up listening to her grandfather's war stories, so we invited her to meet us in Vilnius from her home in Israel. We retraced Sutzkever's smuggling route, and she told us about the night her grandfather barely escaped the Nazi guard at the gate of the Jewish ghetto.
He was knocked down, and the papers came out of him, and he took the gun, the guard, and said, "What? You're not allowed to take anything in, anything."
He says he told the guard that the papers were needed for kindling.
And he let him in.
Great. So before we turn to our speakers, let me remind the audience that you are all muted throughout the program. I do encourage you all to ask questions using the chat box. So please do type your questions out in the chat box, and we will get to your questions later in the program. So right now, it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, take it away, please.
Thank you very much, Olivia, and warmest thanks to the foundation for inviting me to participate in this amazing panel and for sharing this important film about the astonishing activities of Vilna's Jewish Paper Brigade during the German occupation in World War II. In the first step, and I'm sorry about my voice, I hope you can all hear me well. In a first step, I would like to introduce you to some historical background information that may be interesting for our understanding of the achievements of the Paper Brigade and their clandestine, life-threatening resistance to the Nazis' cultural plunder. Due to the limited time we have, I want to concentrate on 3 broader topics and connect each one to a citation of the film. So the first you see here, the citation is "Each person is a book." And I want to connect this to the topic of the importance of culture in books and the opposite, the Nazi cultural genocide. Karl Wolfskehl, a famous German Jewish writer forced by the Nazis into exile in New Zealand, described in 1936, where he lost his library, the close relation between books and the Jewish people poignantly. And I read the quote: "You can't imagine a Jew without books. Nowhere is the joy of having one's own library more widespread than among the Jews. And many anecdotes dating back to ancient times tell of how difficult it was for Jews to part with beloved reading treasures on their journeys of wandering and suffering." This fact obviously has to be considered when thinking about the Nazis' systematic destruction, looting, and devastation of Jewish book culture. As Avrom Sutzkever noted in his diary from the ghetto, the German Rosenberg task force hunted down Jewish texts with the same determination as the Gestapo pursuing Jews in hiding. Please show the next slide. Cultural destruction was an integral part of the annihilation process and is not to be seen as a byproduct. You see this map showing how the task force reached out into every corner of German-occupied Europe to actually loot books and other cultural treasures. The first person who directed attention to this connection between mass murder and the destruction of the cultural treasures directed towards the essence of identity and memory of a group or a people was the Polish Jewish lawyer Raphael Lemkin. He's remembered as the father of the UN Genocide Convention. When coining the legal concept of genocide, he underscored, and I quote what you can read here, that the systematic and organized destruction of the art and cultural heritage in which the unique genius and achievement of a collectivity are revealed in fields of science, arts, and literature must be understood and legally addressed as an attack targeting this collectivity, i.e., as essential part in the attempt to destroy a group or a people. It is impossible to reconstruct the exact number of books and cultural treasures the Nazis confiscated and displaced in the course of the war. But the situation in Western Europe differed significantly from that in Eastern Europe. The rich Jewish cultural landscape of the East, Poland and Western Soviet Union in particular, was pillaged with the utmost brutality and almost entirely destroyed, while Jewish collections in the West were stolen and brought to Germany. The scale of destruction of buildings and institutions did not amount to the same level. For a long time, this entire aspect of the genocidal process did not receive a lot of attention in the research. But Jewish victims and witnesses addressed this fact from the beginning of the Nazis' rise to power. And this brings me to the second topic. Books are the essence of Vilna. Saving books means saving the essence of the community, was said in the film. So I want to talk about book rescue as resistance. And I don't want to retell the activities of the Paper Brigade in Vilna as you saw it in the film, and my co-speakers will certainly add more to their story. But I want to share with you that their rescue and resistance activities, even though in many ways unique, need to be seen as a part of a much wider net of Jewish book rescue activities all over German-occupied Europe. And I brought you 3 examples. The first is from Berlin. The classical philologist Ernst Gromach, whom you see here, was one of the 2 survivors of a large group of Jewish forced laborers working at the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, sorting and cataloging confiscated books that were brought here from all over Europe. He saved many books and became a crucial figure in identifying and locating stolen books after the war. He remembered about their mission, and I quote what you see here. "We were a tight-knit group, the forced laborers, keenly aware that each of us held all the others' destinies in our hands. We were all possessed by the singular mission that by fate had fallen into our laps, to preserve, maintain, and rebuild the looted Jewish libraries ourselves so that they could be one day taken over by us as a central Jewish library. Our bond was strengthened by a multitude of shared experiences, adventures, interests, and a deep sense of responsibility. The Central Jewish Library was not created after the war, but Gromach's efforts, among other things, made it possible to distribute larger collection parts to the Jewish National and Jewish University Library in Jerusalem. Second example is the very famous Onyx Shabbat group in Warsaw. And you have a slide here too, Matthew. In a similar but even larger operation than the one of the Paper Brigade, the Polish Jewish historian Emanuel Ringelblum set up a clandestine meeting on Saturdays in the ghetto Warsaw with many committed comrades, collecting every bit of material and information that documented the tormenting realities, among them also books. Before the ghetto was liquidated, the members of the so-called Onyx Shabbat group hid all these materials in cans and boxes, as you see here on the slide, throughout the ghetto. Parts of these treasures could be located and unearthed after the war and built the precious Ringelblum archive held at the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw today. Lots of hidden Jewish book collections from Poland were gathered there after the war too. The third example, the next slide, is Prague. The Nazis misused the Jewish Museum in Prague as one of their central warehouses for looted Jewish property and installed a group of Jewish forced laborers also here. They had a cruel vision to form a sort of museum of the enemy after the Jews' complete destruction. Most of the workers perished in different concentration camps, but also risked their lives to keep material from destruction and put in all their strength to keep collections together, save them from being trashed, etc. The same was happening in the large ghetto library of Theresienstadt, which was built from mainly looted materials. All these examples, and there are more, show the crucial importance of operations to save books. It is extraordinary to see what was done for their preservation by Jewish actors under unbearable and lethal threats. These activities were a self-conscious act of resistance aimed at ensuring a Jewish future that wasn't imaginable without the books and documents. And this brings me to the last point. A second rescue operation, it was called in the film, the restitution activities. Relating to the film's depiction of Avrom Sutzkever's need to safeguard collections a second time, this time from Stalin, I very shortly want to talk about the Herculean book restitution activities that were initiated right after the war. The unprecedented German confiscation of German cultural treasures was followed by an equally unprecedented history of search and redistribution of these treasures, mostly guided by the idea to let them follow the Jewish communities into the new centers of Jewish life outside Europe. This was also due to the fact that Germany, as well as the Eastern European countries, were not considered an adequate or safe place, neither for the Jews nor for their books. The restitution activity took place between 1944 and 1952, and its main center was the Offenbach Archival Depot near Frankfurt in Germany's American occupation zone that you saw in the film. This institution, established during winter of 1945 to house and restore books, archival materials, and ritual objects, we can see the main hall in the next slide, allowed the American military government in Germany, together with many mostly Jewish individuals supporting it, to return more than 4 million objects to former owners, mostly in Western European countries, or to distribute them to the places where Jews from Europe found refuge. You see here the map showing the intended reversal of the operations of Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg. You remember the other map from the beginning? This is the reversal map. And next to the committed members of the American military government, it was mainly one group of Jewish intellectuals representing the most important Jewish organization at the time that took care of the organizations of a just restitution procedure of the Jewish cultural heritage left by the Nazis' theft. This group was called Jewish Cultural Reconstruction. It was able to set up a trustee organization that was legally authorized to handle Jewish collections and ritual objects that had become heirless a great many of those stored in Affenbach or found in other places in Germany and Czechoslovakia. They not only worked tirelessly in supporting the identification of collections, but they made it possible to distribute more than 500,000 books, several thousand objects to hundreds of Jewish communities in more than 30 countries worldwide, most of them obviously into the United States and into Israel. All books were marked with the ex libris you see here and can be found in nearly all the large community and also universities of Jewish studies centers today. This is also the stamp of the Offenbach archival depot you see here. This rescue of books and the material of Sutzkever and Kaczyginsky saved obviously has to be seen as a part of it, provided a material ground for Holocaust commemoration, as well as a development of libraries and research centers in the new world of post-war Jewry. On the one hand, the books were perceived as tombstones of their murdered former owners. And on the other, they were meant to signify continuity and survival of the entire Jewish people. And herewith, I want to thank you and hand over to HADAS.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hello, everybody. It's nice to see you. As you can see, it's evening here. I'm in Tel Aviv. Tell me, I'm just wondering, because I'm looking at you, it's very nice to see all of you from all over the world, I guess. Which one of you heard of Sutzkever before you saw the film? I see, yes. Very nice. Okay. So, Avrom Sutzkever is a poet and is the leader of one of the leaders of the Paper Brigade, and he's the only Jewish witness in the Nuremberg trial from the side of the Russians, and he's a hero. But from my view, is my grandfather. So I can tell you about that point of view. I grew up with Avrom Sutzkever, and he was my only grandfather. And I didn't even call him grandpa. I called him Abrashe because he was very serious. He was a very serious man, but not a serious grandfather. And before we will begin, I will tell you something, because I lived with all the stories, many stories. I was very curious to hear all the stories from my grandfather. So we had this ceremony every time we came to Abrashe and grandmother. Abrashe and I were used to sitting, and I used to interview him about stories from the war, but he would never tell me a story with bad endings or a scary story. He would always tell me stories with good ending that would bring healing beauty to the world. And that's exactly what he believed, that the role of an artist, of a poet, is to bring healing beauty to the world in order to give them strength to live. So you would hear his poems, and you will never hear from or inside the poems, you will never hear the word Nazi or murder or blood or any of that kind of things. You would always hear words that bring you healing beauty. So one time, because I lived with all of these stories in my head, every time I went to Europe, I tried to find items from the war. So one time I get into an antique shop in Czechoslovakia, and I asked the seller if he had some item from the war. And he was like in shock. And he went to the attic, and he came down, and on his hand was, try to guess, was a yellow star. And that was the first time. It was 20 years ago. That was the first time I've ever seen a yellow star. And I was shaking, and I said, what, this is for sale? And he said, he was also shaking, We were both in this situation, this unbelievable situation. And he was confused, and he said, yes, it's for sale, and it's cost $200. And I didn't buy, and I went to Abrashe. I went back to Israel, and I came to Abrashe. I saw this yellow star in Czechoslovakia, and this guy wanted $200 for it, and I didn't buy. And he was like so cool, with a little smile, seeing this granddaughter shaking, and he's saying, $200? That's very interesting, because I got it for free. I'm very unhappy not hearing your laughter, but I see you laugh because it is funny. But that's the whole story I can tell about a grandfather, and a grandfather like Sutzkever that went through all of this. So I'm getting into the business. So let's see a movie that I produced about my grandfather, which called Black Honey, and you will hear a little bit about Avrom Sutzkever, and then we will go into the Paper Brigade.
If you were a filmmaker who wanted to do a dramatic film about somebody, a poet, let's say, but just incidentally a poet, it could be just an unusual individual, you could take Sutzkever's life and you could take it from beginning to end, and it would be the most astonishing guide to the most dramatic moments in Jewish history of the 20th century.
Okay, so Avrom Sutzkever, my grandfather, was a poet, and he was a nature poet. And I'm saying that because that nature poet that loved to combine poetry with nature, and he wanted to be accepted to the group of poetry called the Young Vilna. And Shmerke Kaczerginsky, which we will meet in a moment, Shmerke Kaczerginsky is also a poet and also in the Paper Brigade, said to him, you cannot be accepted, because your poems, you are writing about snowman in Siberia. You're talking about nature. And it's a Zeit to steal. It's Zeit von Stahl, nicht Kristall. You say it in Yiddish. It's time for it's time for steel, not crystal, like you write. And Sutzkever said, it's time for crystal. Now it's a time for crystal, because that crystal will bring healing beauty, and it will give you the strength in order to fight the steel. So this poet believed that as long as he would write, he would live. And not only in his belief, but his book of poems that he would write during the period of the war, every day, he would write a poem. Not only in his belief, but the book of poems would be smuggled through the Soviet partisans and would reach Moscow, would reach the government and Stalin, and they would send an airplane to the forest to rescue the poet and my grandmother. Frida and Sutzkever were rescued with a suitcase with materials that they rescued from the Paper Brigade, and they were rescued together from that forest to Moscow. So not only in his belief, but actually in reality, he was rescued because of his poetry. So you have to believe that this man believed that literature is stronger than death. That's why he would rescue his life to save literature. That is why he believed that he must rescue the treasures of the Jewish people that the Nazis wanted to what is the word, Olivia? That the Nazis wanted to
eradicate.
Thank you. That word. So he and Shmerke Kaczergiński, which was his friend and his partner in the Paper Brigade, they were asked to choose materials that would be rescued to send to Berlin, and materials that would be that we burned in front of their eyes, and they couldn't let it happen. So they decided that they are going to smuggle everything that they can into the ghetto and put those materials inside basements and attics and inside the walls. And that's what they did. They decided not to cooperate with the Nazis and not to give them anything. So they would choose the material that they want to rescue and bring back to the ghetto. And one time, that is the story that you heard me telling. Did we see Shmerke and Sutzkever? We saw Shmerke and Sutzkever, right, Matthew? This is Sutzkever, you see from the left. And these are the materials that they came back to rescue, came back after the war to rescue. All those materials they put inside the ghetto, as you can see here in this picture. So one time, my grandfather told me that they were in the gate to get inside the ghetto, and this guard caught him. And he said to him, "What are you doing?" And he fell, and from his jacket fell all the papers. And that guard said to him, "What are you doing? You cannot smuggle anything." And he said, "You see, it's only paper, to warm up. It's cold, just to warm up." And that guard said, "Yeah, papers. What can you do with papers?" So he let him pick all the materials, all the garbage to put in to get warm. And in that papers were the diary of Herzl and papers, treasures like Bialik's handwritings and Yud Lamed Peretz handwritings, and all those papers. He could manage to get them inside the ghetto and smuggle them in and hide them. And then you can see in that picture that we saw, they came back after the war, after he was rescued to Moscow. He came back to Vilnius to dig them out, everything he could find and everything that survived. He managed to dig them out and to bring them, most of them, to the Euro, and we will hear Jonathan tell about it after me.
So thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you, HADAS. Thank you, Elizabeth. What I want to do in the brief time that we have is show you some of these papers that HADAS is talking about and try to identify what it was that was at the core of what was saved. We talk about Jewish culture. We think of the Talmud, we think of the Torah, we think of the Haggadah, we think of the prayers of Rabbi Schneerson, we think of the yeshivot, we think of the religious culture of the Jews. But what YIVO was intent upon was the material and social and day-to-day culture of the Jewish people of Eastern Europe, which formed the basis of YIVO's great collection, which is now some 24 million documents. YIVO was founded in Vilna in 1925 and became the site in which all of these materials that Sutzkever and Kaczerginski, that HADAS is talking about, sorted for the Nazis and then also secretly took with them back into the ghettos. So this collection was divided into two parts. Can we see that first slide? In this first slide, we see Sutzkever in the left-hand corner standing before the YIVO building in May 1946. This is all that was left of YIVO after the bombardment of the Soviets in 1944, driving the Nazis out of Vilna. One of the reasons that Sutzkever is standing there is around him, in all of that rubble, are documents and shreds of books. Why? Because the attic of the YIVO Institute itself was used as a secret storage place. Even though YIVO was not in the ghetto, materials, rare materials were stored there. And so in the bombardment, these were all destroyed. And in fact, Sutzkever and others sent 2 boxes of the remnants that they found in the vicinity of the building to YIVO in New York City, where the head of YIVO had relocated in 1940. And we have these materials in our possession today. Next slide, please. Here we see in the YIVO building, Avrom Sutzkever and Shmerke Kaczerginski sorting materials for the Nazis for shipment to Germany, to Frankfurt, Germany, where they were supposed to be used in the Institute for the Study of the Jewish People. Now, as HADAS was saying, Kaczerginski and Sutzkever decided that they didn't want to give all of these materials to the Nazis, and so they secretly hid them in their clothing. There's a famous story about Kaczerginski, who wrapped a Torah scroll around his body, and as he was walking through the gates, he was sure he would be discovered. But at the last moment, the guard looked the other way and he walked through. And among the materials that they were saving were religious materials, cultural materials of all sorts, but also materials of daily life, which I will show in a moment. Next slide. This is a bookend to the photograph that Elizabeth showed earlier of the Offenbach warehouse, because this is those materials identified as YIVO materials in that Offenbach warehouse when they arrived in New York City, thanks to the Manischewitz company. And here in this photograph, you see the 2 Manischewitz brothers with Max Weinreich in the middle, inspecting some of the materials that they helped to deliver from Frankfurt to the United States, to New York City. And this material in those boxes, many of them stamped with the Nazi stamp, formed the basis of what we at YIVO today call the Vilna collection. Next slide. However, not all of the materials were saved and sent to Frankfurt. As HADAS said, many materials were hidden in the ghetto itself, among which were the diary of Theodor Herzl and the writings of Peretz. But among them were also daily ephemera, letters, diaries, journals, all kinds of ordinary things that help people understand what ordinary Jewish people, how they lived, what they thought, how they raised their children, what they did with their lives. And here you see some of those materials that we discovered in Vilnius in 2014, when we began, with the help of the Lithuanian National Library and the Central State Archives and the Wroblewski Library in Vilnius, to conserve for the first time these materials that Sutzkever, Kaczyński, and others had saved and rescued. And we decided we would try to conserve them, we would preserve them, and moreover, we would digitize them. But as you can see from this photograph, they were in terrible condition. They were torn, they were ripped, they were crumpled together. And so the project lasted 7 years, 7 years of work to carefully inspect, straighten, repair these materials, piece them back together again. Often we found that there were materials in Vilnius that we discovered, which were the second half of materials that we had in New York City. And so the project was able then to bring these materials back together again into a single whole. And I often thought of this project as sort of looking for the afikomen. Here is one of the materials that the Paper Brigade saved. It is an autobiography of a 5th grade student, not the diaries of Theodor Herzl, but a 5th grade girl, Beba Epstein, which she wrote and we think could have been submitted to the YIVO Institute for its autobiography contest. There you see her photograph. When I saw this in Vilnius, I was so taken by her photograph that I asked the government to send this to New York. They did. We had a press conference, and the guy from the New York Times came and saw it, and he fell in love with Beba's photograph there. Also, we thought that she had perished in the Holocaust, as nearly all of the children of Vilnius did. The next day, her photograph was on the front page of the culture section of the New York Times, and I got a phone call from her son, who is a lawyer in Los Angeles. So she survived. And he only learned about all of this because of this rescue, because of what Sutzkever and Kaczyński did. Now, following, we'll go through these sort of quickly because I know I don't have a lot of time, but these are some of the things that show us what daily life was that were saved. And I show you these because when I saw them, I was surprised. And I hope you will also be surprised to know that the Iliad and the Odyssey were translated into Yiddish in 1924, which shows that Yiddish was a language that was growing. And Sutzkever, of course, as part of Jung Vilna, was part of that. But it was growing partly because they were translating avidly from many different languages. Keep going. Next slide. This next is The Tale of the Dead Princess and Seven Nights, a translation from Pushkin from 1833. And this is produced in Warsaw in 1917. Next. This is an algebra book published in Vilna in 1829, which again demonstrates the intellectual vigor and ambition of this Yiddish-speaking community. Next. And this is in some ways the most astounding thing that we found among these materials. It was an 1835 astronomical diagram that was produced in Vilna, Poland by a 25-year-old mathematician and astronomer. Keep going. Yes, you can see the enormous care with which this is done. But one of the great things that they saved were copybooks of children in the Vilna school system. And here we see a skeleton, a human skeleton with every bone identified not in Russian, not in Polish, not in German, but in Yiddish. And when I was young, I was told that Jews of Eastern Europe, especially the Yiddish-speaking ones, knew nothing of nature. They had only 3 words for birds. They couldn't tell what kind of flowers were growing. There were red flowers and purple flowers and black flowers and green flowers, but they didn't understand nature. And here we see evidence that overturns these stereotypes, that helps us understand what the real life of the people was. And this is another image from the copybook of a science lesson of botany. Next. And there were also photographs, and this is a particularly interesting one, of a Jewish nurse in the Tsarist army of 1916. Her husband, Elias, was a doctor who later became head of the Jewish hospital in Vilna. And the idea of a Jewish nurse in the Tsarist army challenges so many different stereotypes and preconceptions of the place of Jews in this world. Go ahead. Here is something else that when we show it, people are so interested in. Jewish children in Warsaw in 1938, at the height of anti-Semitism in Poland, coming to the Jewish hospital in Warsaw to be weighed, to be examined, to have their health checked. There was a tremendous drive for the preservation of hygiene and health among the Jewish population, which most people would never have suspected. And this is a wonderful photograph of a nature study camp in the Vilna Jewish Teachers Seminary in Poland, 1922. And here we see them gathered around very much as they might at Choate, Rosemary Prep School in Connecticut, looking, exploring, thinking, alive. These are not kids. These are not young people who have accepted a downtrodden way of life. They are not humiliated. They do not look as though they are defeated in any way. They have strength, they have ambition, they have a feeling of the future and a lust for discovery. And that's what we see. Keep going. Now, all of the things that are implied or present in those slides that I have shown you became the subject of very conscious discussion in Eastern Europe at this time. And this is from Grodno, Poland, 1931, a poster, because Yivo collected posters as well, of the modern family life on trial. What kind of life were we going to lead? Were we going to lead a life that helped orient us toward the future, or we were going to lead a traditional life, of ritual and of traditional values? And this was very self-consciously a part of Jewish life at the time. Other posters we have put the role of women on trial in the modern period, a subject, of course, that is still under much discussion today in the United States and around the world as well. Next one. And this is one of the most haunting photographs we have of a young boy, 13 years old, Yitzhak Rudashevsky, who was born in Vilna. He was a protege of Avrom Sutzkever in the ghetto. And Sutzkever encouraged him to keep a diary of everything that was going on at the time of the Vilna ghetto. And that diary was found after the war. It was not part of the Vilna collection, but it was found independently, and it was given to Avrom Sutzkever, and he gave it to the YIVO Institute. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan and HADAS and Elizabeth. So, audience members, there are just a few questions in the chat box. Now is the time to be continuing to add questions to that chat box, and we will get to your questions in just a few minutes. Right now, I want to take the floor back to tell you about what we have here upcoming at the Sousa Mendes Foundation. So we will have two programs in the month of November, November 10th and November 24th. On November 10th, we are telling the remarkable story of Jan and Antonina Żabinski, who were the heads of the Warsaw Zoo. And there's this famous book, New York Times bestselling book by Diane Ackerman called The Zookeeper's Wife. We will have Diane Ackerman herself as one of our guests. We do have this book available for sale, and we can put the link into the chat box. In addition to Diane on that program on November 10th, we will also have the filmmaker Slavomir Grunberg, and we will have survivor Stefania Sitbon, one of only two living survivors today who hid in the Warsaw Zoo during World War II. It's a story you won't want to miss, and it's a free program. Then on November 24th, we're presenting a totally different story. We're presenting the story of the royal families of Europe, all across Europe, and how they behaved during World War II. We have a two-part film. There's episode 1 and episode 2. So your one ticket will get you access to 2 films. And now we're going to show you a little trailer of this film called Royals at War.
As World War I comes to an end, it is time to settle scores. Although the sovereigns are all cousins, they accuse each other of starting the conflict. Terrorized by the prospect of communism, Hitler and Mussolini seem to be the solution.
I wouldn't have liked to be a 30-year-old German woman in those years. I think I would have followed Hitler blindly too.
I'm not going to tell you that my great-grandfather did everything well, everything right. Many mistakes were made.
We reacted much too late.
The seeds of World War II are in place. To save their crowns, the royals must choose: resist or collaborate.
Okay, so now we'll get to your questions, and there are quite a lot of questions now, so thank you, audience. So one of the questions is, if Stalin sent a plane for Sutzkever, did he respect him as a Jewish writer or poet? If so, why did he subsequently ban Jewish books?
He didn't do it because it was a political, of course, it was a political decision. He wanted to show the allies that he's with them. So it was an opportunity, because there was a former prime minister of Vilnius was banned to Russia, and he was there, and he knew Sutzkever. So he told that he did that connection. But I'm not getting into the details. You know why? Because what I see is a belief of a man, of a poet, that he would be rescued because of his poetry. And that is exactly what happened. How the details happened, how it was managed, this is reality. But in the belief, a poet believes that poetry would save his life, and that's what happened. And he rescued the poetry and the Yiddish back in Israel, because he build the Golden Acade. Did anybody of you heard about the Golden Acade? It's a journal that he edited for 48 years. So in a way, the Yiddish language was built again in a Jewish country in Israel.
So another question is, are there records tracing where the remaining books went when they were redistributed throughout the world? And this audience member wants to know if any of them specifically were sent to Oxford, which now has the Oxford Center for Hebrew and Jewish Studies.
Maybe I quickly try to answer. There is no record for all the books and all their distribution, but there's certainly records from the Jewish Cultural Reconstruction where we can see to which countries and communities and centers some of them were sent and those distributed further. So Cecil Ross, for example, was a very prominent figure in England, taking care of the books from Offenbach coming to the UK and from other places in Germany where they were found. And he was professor in Oxford, so he surely made sure that some of these saved collections came to Oxford and to quite a few other places in England. So quite a few of the German Jewish books, mostly found in Offenbach, returned or were distributed to England, for example. But you have to, and this is a very, very hard job that many committed people are doing now, you have to do provenance research in different centers all over the world now to find these JCR books. We don't have inventories for every single collection and book which was sent where. This is also due to the fact that the records of the JCR were actually destroyed by fire, and we only have parts of their records left.
So this is a question for Jonathan Brent. So what percentage of the YIVO records that you have from the Paper Brigade are digitized, and who are the people who make use of this collection? Do they come in person? Are they remote? Who are the users?
We have digitized close to 2 million documents and books that were saved, either having been sent to Frankfurt or having been stored in hiding in the ghetto. And we brought the two parts of the collection together digitally. To give you an idea of how many people are using this, prior to our digitizing these materials and putting them online for free, about 7,000 people a year would come to the YIVO reading room to do research. Today, in the first year after the full completion of the project, 350,000 people around the world are using these materials from everywhere, from China to Moscow, to Buenos Aires, to the Philippines, to Israel, to Lithuania, Poland, and of course, the United States.
That's so extraordinary. So now we're getting to the end of our hour, and I would like to ask each of you to make some final remarks, starting with you, Jonathan.
To me, the most important thing that was saved, aside from, of course, precious jewels like the diary of Theodor Herzl, are the records of daily life of the Jewish people. Because these tell us that this people from Eastern Europe was not what, certainly not what I learned when I was growing up in the United States. It was not a defeated people. It was not a humiliated people. It was not a people lost in the darkness of superstition and a degenerating tradition. It was a vibrant, strong people, and it's very important for our children to know that. And without Sutzkever and those around him, that record would have been lost forever.
HADAS, I see all the pride that you have being the granddaughter. So what would you like to say to our audience in closing today? And of course, we're thinking about you and everyone all over Israel in these trying times. HADAS, please say some closing words.
I want to say, according to this time, after the 7th of October, I saw a question about the film. I produced it with Yair Kedar from the Hebrew, and if you do the Hebrew, it will be there, and you can see the film online. So I thought that I am his messenger. I thought that it's my role to bring Sutzkever to and his story to the audience. But after the 7th of October, I knew that it's not that I am his deliverer, that he guides me. Because after the 7th of October, I knew exactly what I, as an artist, should do. And at the 9th of October, we got out and we went out as creators and artists, actors, directors, and we went out and we brought healing beauty to our people, with art, with books, with poetry, with literature, with theater, with singing, and we brought the spirit of art in order to bring healing beauty, because this is our job. And this I got from my grandfather. So I was guided exactly to do what I learned from him. In times of darkness, you would bring light to whomever needs that light. And this is what we're doing here in Israel. It's a dark time, but we keep the light for everybody that needs it.
That's so beautiful, HADAS. Elizabeth, what would you like to say today in closing to our...
I think these were very beautiful closing remarks already from HADAS, but I maybe just want to add that if we ask what Sutzkever asked, what will remain, I think my two co-panelists really represent what remains, exactly that, what HADAS said, trying to work for the vision of Sutzkever and perceiving the beauty of these literatures, and to saving and preserving the materials as Yivo does, and keeping them alive and open for all of us to reach and to see and to delve into that world. So I think this is very important to keep the legacy of Sutzkever and keep going in that sense.
Great. Audience members, for anyone whose questions we didn't get to, we'll try to get answers to your questions after the program. Right now, it's my pleasure to thank all three of our wonderful panelists, and to thank you, our beautiful audience that comes every couple of weeks to these programs that we have. See you in November, and have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody. Be well. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.